On this very special episode of Decked, we take a look at, let's see, we got a Panini post here, and let's just take a look. There should be a new set coming out. Wait a minute. What does it all mean? Could it be? The game is ending? Well, not exactly. We have a lot to talk about. As you guys probably have seen, postings for a couple of other big channels for Dragon Ball on YouTube, the game is in fact not ending. It's going to be a whole other experience. But there was a week there where I didn't know any of that. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what life was like in that week between. See, I'm pretty, I came in a little late on the whole Panini DBZ thing. I had seen that the game was getting relaunched. I saw the cards on the little display box there, and I thought that perhaps it was going to be just literally a reprint of the old set, and I said, well, I don't really want to do that. It'd be neat to see the Saiyan Saga reprinted with, corrected text. That'd be neat. So I largely ignored it for the first year. Some friends got me into it. They said, why don't you buy a deck, come down and play? And I said, okay. So I go down to our local store, which is Chaos Games and More. And I start to play the game. I find it's remarkably different because I had played, of course, Score Z back in '99 to about 2000. I want to say 2004. That was a hardcore kind of thing. I was playing it all the time kind of time. Got big into that version of the game. Played Piccolo almost from the start. Played lots of different decks, but eventually homed in on Piccolo as being my guy. I became pretty well known for only playing Piccolo. They always said, "Oh, and Mario's playing Piccolo." Like we said, had an amazing time, had some amazing bouts with it. My brother played the game, of course, with me. He chose Saiyan style, and we chose opposing styles without really trying. We didn't really intend to do that. We had fights that could go on for hours as I would recover from multiple giant hits. He would hit me with gigantic knockout blows. Usually he would just draw out by the end of the game. It was a different kind of time back then. Well, like we said, my time with Panini has been real different than Score back in the day. Like we said, Score went on for a long time. I technically was not playing the game at the time it ended, so I didn't get to experience that. This one, like we said, came out of nowhere, took us all a little bit by surprise. A lot of folks, I understand, saw this one coming with Panini's lack of interest in the game as a whole, that they refused to market, refused to really put any work into anything. Really weren't all that interested in building up a community, the kind of stuff you usually expect to be built around one of these sort of trading card games. So, like we said, my time with Panini, I would have started sometime in, I want to say early 2015, maybe like April, something like that. And I started playing locally. I didn't even have my own deck. I had cards. I bought packs. I barely had enough cards to make a deck. Now, I don't mean in the sense of making, like, I want to make the deck that I want and I have almost enough cards. No. I mean, I barely had enough cards to pick a color and make 60 cards out of it. I remember those early days were really something. Like we said, the Panini game, thankfully, I could tell was built with a little bit more care because, as you know, the Score game was a little haphazard. They weren't as into it at the beginning as they should have been, and sort of made a game that had to be balanced, regulated, and turned into a more consistent game as time went on. If you ever read the Saiyan Saga cards from Score Z, you'll understand what I mean. There's paragraphs, sentences, things like that on the cards where you say, what does that mean again? So, like we said, my time with Panini was great. I would have fought in different things, different decks. I would have homed in, of course, on Piccolo, of course, come on. And then I would have competed my first regional in 2015. Did comparatively lousy, got stomped by some decks I shouldn't have. Fought a Black Krellin, killed him by one life card. I remember lots of Ginyus that were just running a train on me. It was awful. So another year passes. I compete in all kinds of stuff. Every Friday we get together, we play, we have a great time. We start to form bonds and friendships at our local scene, I get to know a lot of different people. It's a really good time. The local scene, like we said, was a changing group because you probably have a similar experience where the people who play don't always show up consistently. It's like they got their own lives. I'm not going to twist nobody's arms. But what I mean is, it can change from week to week, and that keeps the landscape fresh. I would have to say myself and a few other guys were pretty much some of the only fixtures. I've only missed a few game days out of the whole year. Like we said, the local scene was awesome. We used to pay in our tournament entries. We had amazing matches. Sometimes guys would come over from another city over and come and play. I've had some of the greatest victories of my life and biggest crushing defeats of my life, playing at the local scene like that. Now, for those of you who might not know, I took an extra long hiatus from card games in general. I probably stopped playing card games just in general. I want to say sometime in late 2006, early 2007. I just took a break from all of them. In my time, I played Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Dragon Ball. They're really tiny Magic. I was never a big Magic guy. I really kind of left off card games as a whole. For giggles, we went back and played Pokemon, me and my brother, and we came up with a deck that made us laugh because we said if there's ever been a deck that just beats you in one turn, we made it. We made the equivalent of the Rain Dance Blastoise deck from very early Pokemon games. We basically recreated it with fire, so you have one turn power-ups, and basically unless you have more than 120 HP, you're not going to survive that first hit. So we found a way to ruin people's days. That was kind of our end of our card game experience for the longest time until this, Panini Z came out. And it was very interesting to get back into a competitive card game. I'm one of those people, I need to have competition. I need to have... I always tell people, I call it sport. Part of me is like that. I enjoy the thrill of competition, of overcoming an opponent, that kind of thing. Like we said, I got to compete in a lot of different things. The regionals, were amazing to train for. I had my own Rocky montage of training. Me and my buddy Angelo can attest to our long days training for our regionals. Both of us getting exhausted, but still playing game after game late into the night. It was good times. ARG events here in Colorado were amazing. We got to go to those ones. Fight some truly tough decks. If you ever wanted to see what net decks are like, what if I fought all net decks? What's life like if I just fight deck recipe after deck recipe from the internet? Whatever won the big last tournament. That's what our time at ARGs were always like. So it was like getting put through the ringer, but in a good way. We had a lot of friends playing this particular game. Really had a lot of friendships I didn't expect to make. A lot of people who I'm friends with who I would literally never have met otherwise. That actually is going to lead us into sort of the time we were talking about in between, between that Friday and that Friday when we learned about the game's future. So we got together, and a friend of mine who very closely watches the Panini website, Angelo, had come over and told us about the announcement. I hadn't heard a thing. I was just coming in to play our usual Friday games like we always do. And he told me, "You hear the game's dead?" And I said, "Game's dead? Go on. What does that mean?" So I'd never heard of anything like that. Never really heard of a card game ending. Truth be told, Dragon Ball always has a built-in end to it, because as you know, it's built on sagas, and eventually Panini was going to run out of sagas. We were talking about if they kept at the pace that they had, the game only had a year and a half left, but we were also at peace with that idea, that we would go through all the sagas, we'd have a pretty good card pool, and if the game, ended at that point, we'd still be able to make fun decks and ideas, kind of like the way Scorzy ended up. So we moped pretty hard. We played a goodbye tournament, if you will, a last hurrah tournament, good times. Wished I recorded some matches. Me and CJ had an amazing Piccolo and Vegeta match. It was one for the record books. We ended up with a thing where we started to take apart what Panini was saying on the website. Now, like we said, don't want to be too unpopular opinion guy, but I guess I'm going to have to anyway. There's something about the way that Panini put it in the announcement, talking about, we are going to have to, end the game, it's been an amazing 2 years, that kind of thing. There's a part of it that doesn't sit right, and I understand if a lot of people are going to go ahead and take a dissenting opinion, there is room for that. If you don't agree, don't. When they decide to hang this whole thing on the folks at Bandai saying, Bandai doesn't want us to flood the market, or as they say, oversaturate, I could understand that. It's the reason you don't see, like, Superman ever shows up. I mean, more or less. I mean, Batman is maybe a better example. Batman absolutely never shows up on DC TV universe, on the shows like Arrow and Flash, because basically they will not allow such a type of character to appear in multiple formats. I don't think it's technically oversaturation, but I'm sure some producer somewhere does. But anyway, like we said, there's something that doesn't ever sit right when they say Bandai. Bandai, of course, that's 100% true. Bandai is the master license holder for anything Dragon Ball related for card games and such. However, when you take a look at the Cardus game, I don't know how to pronounce it, that Bandai wanted to put out, it's a child's game. It's a higher number wins child's game. That has a very specific market. I want to say below 18 years old, I would assume, because there's nothing about it that appeals to me as an adult. I couldn't help but notice that there's probably not very much in the way of overlap. We never had anybody younger than say 20 playing Dragon Ball with us. It just never came up. So what I'm getting at is, and this is we're talking about regionals, ARG, nothing. I never saw younger people in there in general, and I don't know if that's just the way this game is or if that's just a Colorado thing. I don't know. But long story short is, I never sensed that there was actually going to be any market overlap between the two games because they don't seem to be trying to appeal to the same audience. There was quite enough room for that. But this leads me to my other assertion. That you guys remember how we had talked about how Panini was just in it to get the money as a quick cash grab? Yeah, they basically was going to pay for the license when it was very cheap. At the time when they picked it up, it probably was pretty cheap. So the idea was, okay, we hire some contractors, we get in some developers, some guys who'd just be honored to work on it, hint, hint, the old world champions. And they said, hey, go ahead and come in, make a game for us. And they came in, built the game, this time, with the entire other game in the rear view, being able to say, okay, we know what worked, what didn't. They got rid of concepts like focused attacks. They had endurance as a part of the game from the beginning instead of introduced much later. So what I'm getting at with all that is that they basically streamlined it and stripped off absolutely any and all extras to make the game as cheap as possible to produce. They paid a little bit for the license, paid as little as possible in promotions and all that, and marketing, paid as little as they could to the developers because they didn't make them regular employees. They just brought them in, so many sets at a time to build them. And if you ever wonder why it feels like some cards that Panini would make, you're like, Panini, did you guys ever play test anything? Now you know they didn't, because there really wasn't time to do that. I guess technically the developers could go on and do it on their own, but that would be them doing it on their own. The next thing we're going to talk about is if the game, like we said, wasn't actually going to conflict with Bandai's Cardus game, and it wasn't going to be, like we said, that kind of problem, so they'd basically just cancel it for monetary reasons. We had guessed that there was a point at which Panini had a break-even point where they were no longer comfortable investing money into the game, that they said, basically, here's what we put out. Let's just throw a number out there. Let's say $200,000, $300,000 a year to be able to obtain the license. Just, I don't know the rules of license agreements. I don't know if they stretch several years at a time. I don't know how all that works. But it would be something like that. They would essentially rent the option to use the names and distinctive likenesses and whatnot for the game. That's how licensing works. So they would license it for a certain amount of time, for a certain amount of cost, and if you think about it, they don't make any money until they've at least broken even. So Panini was probably just hitting a point at which the license was simply too expensive to maintain, and they needed an out. And I understand that they would want to throw that shade on Bandai and say, no, don't blame us, blame Bandai. Bandai took away our option and said you're going to saturate the market. My guess, Bandai wouldn't have cared. The games are unrelated and don't seem to be fixed on the same markets. There's no reason to think they would have interfered with each other. They didn't even give it the option. They simply could have finished. Remember, like we said, at the pace that Panini was going, even though they were ignoring side sets like Score's Power Packs where they did Future Gohan and other side personalities, that they only had a year and a half, like we said, left in the game at the pace that they were going with the sagas as they were. Unless they were going to do something completely different and break up the sagas differently than they did in Score Z, but so far they hadn't done too much of that. So, where does that leave us at this point? Panini has lost my business for good. I appreciated what they did when they did it, but leaving us like that and saying and blaming someone else, no, I'm good. I'm good. I don't care about whatever Panini ever puts out again. I'm good. As far as that goes, where does that leave us at this point? Here we are with all of our time and money and energy invested into this game. Where on earth does that leave us? Then the next Friday came, and a fellow over there at Random Number Gaming brought out some really interesting news. Now, it was Mana Beast, of course, who had said, hey, the game isn't over, we're shopping some stuff. I didn't really know what any of that meant because, it was an expensive proposition, and it might be hard to get a different card company to want to pick it up because if a card company's out there, they already have their own game, right? So that Friday comes along, and he shares with us, from Random Number Gaming, that we're going to have a situation where essentially some of the developers, not all of them, because I imagine some of them want to be paid, are going to go ahead and continue producing the game. Essentially continue on with the plans that they already had. Because if you think about it, of course the developers had ideas for future sets. They had been developing the game from the beginning and knew where things were ultimately going. So they would be the ones best equipped to continue. You can say, well, how can you continue if Panini doesn't produce the game? How do we get our cards? How do they actually have legal standing to do this? Well, that's where it gets a little complicated. See, if you guys don't know what the difference between a TCG, a trading card game, and an LCG is? Let me just briefly explain. A TCG is like, Magic, Pokemon, any of these ones that do booster packs, and you buy your cards a little bit at a time. The whole point is the randomness of the packs and everything. You trade to get things that you need. There are other games out there that are more reminiscent of board games called LCGs, living card games. You've probably played a lot of those. A lot of them can be called deck builder games. Essentially, everybody gets the same cards. So that's generally how it works. Everybody gets the same set of cards. There's not really a difference. It takes the randomization part of it out of the equation, so basically everybody gets the same card pool. It's like chess. Chess is where everybody gets the same pieces, So the big idea here is that the folks, at least from what I understand, the developers are going to go ahead and create a virtual set for us. Now that means essentially set 8 is going to come out exactly as it would have. It'll come out later, sometime between end of February, early March, which is fine. I'm not in a giant hurry. I'll give them time to finish, because they're actually going to get time to play test, which never happens. So these virtual cards, like we said, will be released probably either as a pack or as a series of JPEGs, images for us to be able to work with. Now there's a couple of different options for how we want to proceed from there. I'm sure somebody will go ahead and convert these and push them into the Octagon game and other similar online games. So if you wanted to continue playing, you can. You can use Octagon if you want to continue playing with them entirely virtually. This is super neat because as time goes on, you're going to be able to see the sets come out in this fashion in a much similar way. Changes and errata is pretty much immediate. So we don't have to wait, forever for Panini to recognize that there's even a problem. Of course, the whole Octagon thing isn't really going to do it for a lot of us, because a lot of us know about Octagon. Some of us use Octagon, but not all of us use it as our consistent way we play the game. And speaking of which, that wouldn't do anything for our meetings and our Fridays. Like I said, I grew attached to the people we play cards with, so I really wouldn't want to interrupt that if I could. So what's going to happen then? Well, those of us who've been printing out our cards and proxying them for some time, for either cards we don't have or cards we couldn't afford, this is nothing new to us. Next video, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we expect to do large-scale proxies. If we have to basically print out the entire next set, how we suggest doing that for yourself or for a group, and how one actually carries it out in like Photoshop. So that's our big idea, that we are going to get to continue playing the game that we love. It'll be a little different. It'll be the first time I've ever seen a TCG turn into an LCG, but it's doable. So then what should I leave you with? What idea should I leave you with after all that we've discussed? That if you've ever played a particularly brutal game of Dragon Ball Z, where you're just getting your rear end kicked the whole way, getting stomped, it's a one-sided blowout, and then all of a sudden you mount a comeback. Your opponent is caught off guard. You start to wail on him in a way you didn't expect. Combos are going off in the way that you did not expect to be able to string together, especially after the damage you've taken. And then all of a sudden the game is even. And then after one key card is played, you either blocked a decisive hit, or you would have attacked them and eliminated all their power stages so that they're unable to continue their assault, and you turn the tide and come back. That's kind of what we did here with this, guys. We came back from a dead game to a live game to a game that could prosper again.